So this is the bottom triangle, and the distinguishing factor is it's got a pair of extrusions on each leg of the triangle. One of the things you've got to be careful about is notice that in the corner extrusion there is a hole on one side of the corner bracket and no hole on the other side. That hole is where the wiring for the stepper motors is going to pass through so that it doesn't impact the table. So you want to be sure that those holes are all in the lower position. And it doesn't really matter what's up or down as far as the extrusions go, but you want to be sure that all three of the corner braces are lined up the same way. You want to tighten these up then with your ball driver. And the ball driver, nice thing about the ball driver is it allows you to come in at an angle past the extrusion itself, and that's good because there's really no way to get to these screws otherwise except at an angle. You don't really need to crank down on it any harder than you can get it with the screwdriver handle of the ball driver. You could come in there with another hex key at an angle and tighten it down. Work your way all the way around. Make sure that all of the screws are tightened down, and be sure that those insertion nuts are engaged firmly in that aluminum extrusion, in the channel of the aluminum extrusion. If you're doing it with the nuts that they supply, they tend to kind of slip and move a little bit sideways. So nice thing about these insertion nuts, I don't know if you can see this right here, but if you look at this boss on the back side of the insertion nut, you see that it's kind of got a it's not an oval shape, I don't know what you'd call that shape, but it's squared off on the corners. And what that does is that allows it to go into the slot long ways, and then when it turns, it's captured on the edges of the extrusion. So if you can kind of imagine that my fingers are the edges of the extrusion, and then these little corners right here catch on the edges of that channel and prevent it from turning any further. And then it's got these teeth right here that bite into the extrusion, and that allows it to stay nice and snug. Alright, I've got the top and the bottom triangles done. The next step is to actually assemble the stepper motors. These are nice. These are fairly nice stepper motors. These are, what are these? NEMA, I think these are NEMA 23s. No, they're NEMA 17s. Anyway, three nice stepper motors. It's got three small ones. The smaller ones operate the effector, and then there's a larger one here. This one operates the Bowden extruder, and we'll get to that later. So I'll put that one aside. So here's our stepper motors, and they're going to go in the corners here, like so. But before we put those in, we're going to put the pulleys on them. So here's one of the toothed pulleys for the stepper motors. They just slide on here, and notice that the stepper motor actually has a flat on here, and there's a pair of set screws here at 90-degree angles. So these are easy to do. They just slide on here and then they tighten down. The instructions do specify that you should leave a bit of a gap between the motor and the end of the shaft, and so be sure you look at the instructions and get those in the right place. So what the instructions call for is to place the outer flange of the stepper gear or pulley, tooth pulley, about 5 millimeters from the very end of the shaft. And of course, in the United States, it's hard to find a good metric ruler. At least you can't find one at Walmart. I live out in the middle of nowhere, so Walmart's pretty much my choice. I have to drive about 30 miles to get to a Walmart. So getting at 5 millimeters is a little bit difficult to do, just because this ruler is not ruled to the end. You can see at the other end here, it's all rounded off at the end. I guess what I could do is grind this off, but someday I need to order a good metric ruler, but I just don't have one. So instead, what I'm going to do is take my digital calipers and just set that at 5 millimeters, or as close to 5 millimeters as I can get. I don't think it's critical. I think being within 1/100th of a millimeter is probably close enough, as long as I make them all the same. And now I can use this depth gauge right here to just set that distance just like that, and then I'll tighten down that set screw. So I'm going to do that on all three, but you don't need to watch me do that. Just tighten up a set screw. I'll do that off camera. Okay, I've got the 3 stepper motors prepared here with pulleys on the ends of each one. I got a feeler gauge here. I wanted to make sure that there was adequate clearance between the backside of the pulley and the motor, so that there wasn't going to be any binding or interference between the pulley and the motor, and there isn't. There's about 5 thousandths of clearance here between the backside of the pulley and the front face of the motor. So we're ready to put those in. The stepper motors go here in the corners. The instructions tell you to put the stepper motors in so that the connectors are up. But after I put together the first machine, I ended up having to take one of them apart because I'd made a mistake. And when I put the motor back in, I realized that the routing of the wiring would be a little bit easier if I turned each of the stepper motors 90 degrees. And there's a motherboard that's going to go in here, and by turning it this way, the ribbon cable that runs from the stepper motor to the motherboard, which is going to be, I haven't decided where it's going to be yet, it doesn't really matter, is a little bit shorter. So what I'm going to do is orient all of these steppers 90 degrees from what's specified in the instructions. The other thing that does is that the wiring harness comes up. If you install it the way the instructions specify, the wiring harness is going to come up and run into the bottom of the build plate that's going to be right on top of here. It doesn't actually hit the build plate, but at some point I'm planning to add a heated bed to this. The listing for this product that's on Amazon right now actually says it's supplied with a heated bed. I ordered this about 2 days before the heated bed became available, but I also paid less for it, so I'm not too upset about that, although it would have been nice to have had the heated bed and the upgraded power supply that comes with the heated bed come with this machine. But I pretty much print with PLA. That's all I've used for the last year. I haven't really tried ABS on any of the other 3D printers that I have access to, and I'm not really worried about not being able to do ABS at this point for what I do, which is most of this stuff is done in a school shop with students. I teach middle school, and my students are pretty much satisfied with what they can do with PLA, so not too worried about that heated bed right now. So actually installing a stepper motors can be a bit of a challenge. What you've got to do is reach in here with your screwdriver, and I find it easy to just use my ball driver, put the screw on the end of the ball driver, and then just kind of tuck it in there with my finger. Whoops, good thing I got plenty. So work that down in there and get it through the hole, and I get the top ones in. I've dropped 2 in a row. There's a bit of a relief cut. 3 in a row. There's a bit of a relief cut here, so you can get your ball driver in there at an angle to tighten that down. Once you get it through the hole, it's a little easier. So then I'm going to bring the stepper motor again, and remembering to turn that connector 90 degrees instead of having it straight up and down. And what I want to do is kind of get all of those connectors kind of pointing in the same direction. I'm just gonna tighten that up just till it bites. I'm not actually gonna snug this down yet all the way. Come on. A little bit feisty this morning. There we go. That one's in. There's the top one. One side. Just get that barely in. Then I'm gonna flip this over. Again, double check, be sure that these holes in the brackets, these holes for the wires to go through, be sure that they are on the bottom in all 3 corners, or you're going to have to take the whole thing apart, because there's nowhere for the wires to run if you don't make sure that that hole's at the bottom. Those are the wires, they're not for the stepper motors, those are the wires for the homing switches. Homing switches are basically edge detecting sensors. They tell you when the effector, the slides move to the home position. So I'm just going to get each one of these in there loosely, and you should be able to see how that goes, so I'm not going to waste your